No, it's a wasp.
Hi all, and welcome to the special event hosted by Climate Reality Project Canada. In collaboration with Friday for Futures Toronto, today we're bringing together activists from across generations to build better understanding of what climate change, climate justice, and climate activism. The purpose of live stream is in preparation for tomorrow's Global Day of Action organized by Fridays for Future. Just before we begin, I would like to do a territory acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from Lekwungen Territory in Victoria, BC, but recognizing that we have folks joining us from all across Turtle Island. And I'd just like to have everybody reflect on a moment of how did you come to this land, whether by creation stories from your nation or stories of your ancestors settling upon these lands, just to have a think of where you are and how you got here. Okay. Before we get into it, first let's explain a little bit about the organizations we have represented today. The Climate Reality Project Canada originated the Climate Project Canada. The organization was created in May of 2007 with the objective of educating Canadians about science and the impact of climate change, as well as solutions to address it. Based on the model of Climate Project founded by former US Vice President and Nobel Peace Laureate Al Gore, the primary means of dismantling information and was still through trained climate reality leaders from demographics, regions, and sectors and backgrounds. The climate reality leaders originally gave adapted versions of the slideshow presented in the documentary An Inconvenient Truth. Fridays for Future Toronto is the local chapter of Fridays for Future Global Climate Strike Movement. They are a youth-led grassroots organization with the primary mission of mobilizing demand of climate justice through organization of school strikes, rallies, and marches. Fridays for Future Toronto recognizes that the climate crisis is not just an environmental crisis, but a social justice crisis too. They have adopted a number of intersectional demands that aim to create a space for youth advocate to build a better world that uplifts marginalized voices. Follow the principles of climate justice that empowers youth to demand a future that is sustainable and just for all. The Climate Reality Project is happy to announce, as a part of a panel encourages youth to speak up and take action. We've also inspired an initiative that brings a place and becoming a fruition in the coming weeks. Campus Courts is an opportunity for students to help their schools cut emissions and make their campuses better, greener places. 100% student-led initiative that offers students the opportunity to take meaningful climate action in the right campuses. Today we have youth climate leaders trained in climate reality leaders to speak about the urgency taking place in action at this time. Today we aim to amplify voices across generations of climate activism and shed some light on key topics linked to climate justice and intergenerational mobilization from a diversity of perspectives. Introducing Sophia.
Hi, my name is Sophia Mathur. I'm 13 years old, and I've been striking with Fridays for Future since November 2nd, 2018. I'm also part of a lawsuit that's suing the Ontario government for not taking enough action on the climate. I also recently just became a climate reality leader along with my friends Maggie and Jane. We had a lot of fun that day and learned a lot of information. And finally, I'm also a part of a TV show called Citizen Kid TV, which engages youth to take action on the climate crisis and to get active in this movement. So thank you for introducing me, and I'm excited to be here.
Great. Cooper.
Hi, my name is Cooper. I'm 16. I'm a high school student from so-called Toronto, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Seneca, and many other reported and unreported First Nations peoples. I'm an activist with Fridays for Future Toronto, as was introduced before, and Climate Strike Canada, which is the national network of youth activists from coast to coast to coast. And actually, like Sophia, I was involved in the Citizen Kid TV Earth Comes First documentary about young youth activists that premiered in June. And also, like Sophia, I'm super excited to be here and can't wait to have some really amazing conversation with all of you.
Great, thanks. Ruby.
Hi, I'm Ruby. I use she, her pronouns. I am an 18-year-old activist with Fridays for Future Toronto from so-called Toronto. I've been involved with climate striking for about a year now because I got involved last September. In last year, I made a education program to run in schools so Fridays for Future Toronto can educate students about climate striking, and I was also involved in a campaign against Bill 1 in Alberta, as well as the Eyes Open campaign. Yeah, and like Cooper and Sophia, I'm super excited to be here and have a conversation with you guys.
I'm excited too. And Jane?
Do you mean Judy?
I think Judy, I'm sorry.
That's no problem at all. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. And yes, my name is Judy Feinstein, and I'm coming to you. I live in Victoria, BC, the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation. It really is an honor to be here with you. And I was trained as a climate reality leader in 2008 in the first Canadian training. It took place in Montreal. And in 2009, I became the lead mentor for British Columbia, and I have had that role and loved that role since that time. In the early 2000s, realized I needed to learn as much as possible about climate change, and it came to my realization that the involvement of young people and the voices of young people were critical to respond to these issues. That led me to start an initiative and a nonprofit organization called Yes BC, Youth for Environmental Stewardship, which is dedicated to raising the voice of youth and empowering them as climate leaders. And for the last 7.5 years, I've worked in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia for an elected leader, the first elected Green leader to the provincial government of BC, Andrew Weaver, who also happens to be a leading climate scientist. And that I'm now transitioning out of that role as a snap election has been called in BC. So I'm very, very excited to be here with you today and to learn more about youth action and how I can support that.
Great, thank you. And then myself, my name is Katelynne Herchak. My traditional name is Elisaki. My ancestry is from Kuujjuaq, Quebec. I'm Inuk on my dad's side. I'm also coming to you from the Lekwungen territory. So Judy, we could be neighbors. I wear a lot of hats, but currently I work for Reconciliation Canada and VIDEA. So I work with Indigenous youth from all across Turtle Island. So let's get out of here and let's get to it. Let's start with a broader question. How would you define climate activism, just given the current context of the world? What does climate activism mean to you now?
I'd be happy to start off and people can jump in. So right now during the pandemic, we've had to pivot a lot with our climate activism, which is very broad and applies to many different things, but mainly for Fridays for Future Toronto, that means a fight for climate justice. And throughout the pandemic, we've had to move online. We'd have to limit our actions. We have to take into account social distancing, which is obviously something that none of us have really had to worry about before. And it's been a very different experience, but at the same time, we continue to fight for climate justice, which does mean fighting for those other issues such as economic justice, racial justice, social justice, and putting those all together under the climate activism umbrella.
I could take I can continue with the question. I'm sorry if I interrupted anyone, but I think that with the pandemic, as soon as it started, I think we were all, well, especially my group here, we were a little worried about how we'd catch the attention of everybody, because now everyone's caught on all the information about the pandemic, because as soon as it reached Canada, I think everyone was like really freaking out. But I think now we got a handle of Zoom, working online, and finding new cool ways to get people engaged online, like doing question and answers, and that's a lot easier online because people can submit answers. So there are a lot of benefits to being online.
So I'll jump in and say what climate activism means to me is the work that we need to do to move us to a sustainable future for all. And my own personal interest in this is especially to raise the voices and mobilize young voices so that they are heard and at the table as we move forward.
Do you want to hop in, Ruby?
Okay, like I guess what climate activism means and what climate activism is hasn't really like changed during the pandemic. We're still demanding things like a Green New Deal and a just recovery, and I guess that's a pandemic thing, but like a just transition to a greener economy. Like these are still things we're demanding. But I think the pandemic has added this extra level of adversity. Youth activists already face a lot of adversity being young. Our voices aren't always like heard and they aren't always listened to. And so I think like the pandemic and needing to like grow and learn how to do activism during a pandemic just makes climate activism and like what we do like all the more powerful and important. Like the fact that we're able to continue when, large parts of the world have had to shut down is quite special.
Yeah, I agree. I think what this pandemic has shown us is our resiliency and how we can resort back to sustainable ways of living. I have a question here. What are the necessary steps to reverse or at least slow down global warming according to the best united science currently available?
I guess I can maybe take a run at this, and our transition to a clean energy future requires that we move from fossil fuels to renewables, and that we stop subsidizing the dirty energy industries. We need to have more stringent emission reductions targets, and we need to follow the science. And we need to build climate accountability into the legislation to meet these targets. So for me, this means investing heavily in climate solutions that put us on a path to decarbonization. So we need political will to support climate and nature recovery.
Judy pretty much summed up what I was thinking in my head, but I just wanted to add that we need to not just listen to the scientists, but we need to listen to our Indigenous experts, and we need to follow their advice, and because they're the original people of this land, and we need to listen to them. And I just wanted to add that, but thank you.
If I can also just jump in with something, obviously amazing answers, and there's very little to add to all of those, but just something from Toronto. We're always advocating right now for a just recovery, but then for a Green New Deal, which we see as the kind of radical solution that we need to the climate crisis. And I know there are a lot of different definitions of a Green New Deal. Obviously, it involves investing in renewable energy and green technology, but it just means investing in communities. And we know that with a crisis like the climate change, like the climate crisis, we need big solutions.
Yeah, for sure.
I think adding to just what Sophia and Cooper said, it's important, like with these, like a Green New Deal or a Just Recovery, to understand that like the climate crisis affects like marginalized and like racialized communities like more severely than it might other communities. And so it's like really important that like we consider those like when we are making policy and like making these necessary steps to like reverse the climate crisis or like, you know, slow it down.
Yeah, I totally agree. And kind of building off that question, how can we adjust our lifestyles in big and small ways that have a positive impact on the environment?
I mean, I guess I want to start by like I think saying that like it's important like to I think about the fact that like a lot of the emissions produced, like I think it's something like the top like 70 something percent of emissions are produced by like the top 100 country like corporations in the world. And so like I think it's important to understand that like it's not, you know, it's up to each of us to like stand up like to the government and like stand up for what we believe in, but like we really need like a systemic shift. And like it's like like our whole system and like our economy needs to like shift to green, more like green things. And so like what you can do in your everyday life is like call your politicians, like you know, go out and vote, like become involved in politics and demand that they make those systemic changes. Because like at the end of the day, like buying, you know, like buying like clothes secondhand is great, and those like lifestyle changes are great, but those are not going to be the like actionable solutions that we need. They're just not enough.
I loved Ruby's answer. I just want to add a few ideas there that we can think and act with our wallets. We can spend our money in businesses that align with our values. We can refuse this culture of consumerism and having to have the latest shiny thing. So I think a change in attitude needs to be from what I want to what I need. And I think education is so key and empowering, and we can help by getting educated ourselves and helping to inform others. And certainly changing our light bulbs, yes, is important, but pressing for political change, changing laws, and that is very important.
Yeah, I think both Judy and Ruby pretty much summed up what I was thinking in my head. I think that we all have very similar thoughts to these answers. But I just wanted to add that goodness, just lost my train of thought. I just wanted to add that it's so easy to get involved with the movement. You might think all you need to do is just to get involved with Fridays for Future and join the movement or join other stuff is just talk to people about the climate crisis, educate yourself, get involved, like just post on social media and push for government action, because as Ruby said, at the end of the day, it's in our government's hands. So I definitely think that we need to push for government action. I think that everyone can get involved, and it's very easy to grab a sign and post a photo of you getting out there, I guess.
For sure. Cooper, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, sure. I guess just kind of adding on to Ruby's point, I think something we saw with this pandemic was that when everyone came together and they took individual action, the emissions went down for a bit and then they came right back up, which I think really points to that issue of we need system change, not individual action. And I'm not discouraging anyone from taking those individual actions, because every little bit can count. But like all of you said, political action on the individual scale is so powerful.
It's interesting that we've moved into this direction of conversation, because the next couple questions are relating to topics we've already just started to dive into. So I think that's a really good indicator we're on the right track. Now more than ever, we see youth taking a stand for climate justice. Why do you think it is important to allow non-traditional forms of protest to take center stage? It's a big question. Yeah, go for it, Ruby.
I mean, I guess depends on what you mean by like non-traditional forms of protest, but I'm gonna take that as like, you know, like the fact that youth are really like dominating the like organizing of like these like climate protests and stuff. I think there's something like really powerful and special about that, and it's really important that like youth are like the ones standing up, because at the end of the day, like it's us that's gonna have to live through the climate crisis. Like we are the ones who are going to like suffer as a result of what happens 30 years from now or 10 years from now. And so like it directly affects us, like what we do now. But also I think like youth are quite special in the way that like a lot of us haven't, you know, been fully like socialized by society. We haven't, you know, had to work a 9-to-5 job. And so we don't like think necessarily within the like same constraints as like an adult might. And so there's just sort of this like creative aspect that I think is like very powerful and like important.
Go for it, Judy.
Yes, so I have always thought of young people as leaders, not leaders of tomorrow, but leaders now. And that is so integral to how I approach my work. And I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there too. But I think raising youth voices has never been more important. And I'm incredibly inspired by the way that young people lead. And, you know, my involvement with youth leadership has absolutely inspired me and driven me forward. And you are the ones that are leading us all forward to a sustainable future. And I feel an obligation for my generation to support your work, to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. We are not passing off my generations, the problems that we've created, onto you and hand it to you and say, there you go, it's up to you to solve this. Oh no. I have a moral obligation to my children, to all people, to everyone, to stand up, to raise your voices and work with you because we are in this, very much in this together.
I just wanted to say that we need everyone in this movement, especially youth. Youth are the voices of the movement because we are going to be the most affected by the climate crisis in the future. But we also need adults because a lot of adults are politicians and are political leaders, and a lot of adults are young adults are going to be voting in the next election in the USA. And we also need elders for wisdom because we need to follow the advice of elders, and we need to get everyone on our side. We need everyone on our side to get this, to create a safer climate for future generations.
Yeah, those are really, really great points about youth. Just kind of returning to the idea of non-traditional protest, I just kind of want to highlight, I think, how powerful it is that the disruption that we cause with our protests, and we often undervalue the fact that we had hundreds of thousands of youth skip school across Canada, and kind of the ripple effect that caused in our policymaking and with our government leaders. And I think really what's non-traditional about us as youth, and kind of connecting to what Ruby said, is that we're not afraid to take those disruptive actions. And at the end of the day, those are what bring about the most change. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree. Okay. It's come up a little bit here throughout our conversation. And I think a really good question to ask is, what do you think is the most difficult challenge climate activists face today?
I would say probably the biggest challenge of climate activists, as mostly young people, or at least in the way that we think about it now with people like Greta or young climate strikers in Canada, is that as young people, our voices are often not listened to with the same respect as someone older. And that definitely varies in community. It varies based on identity of the person and the young person. But each time we go into a political fight, we have to put in that extra effort that adults and older people don't. And I think just kind of recognizing all that effort that that takes just to be put on the same level, when I think we've shown that we really do have great ideas for what needs to be done in this country, and what our government leaders can do to step up and take action, but we're not being listened to.
I also think like one thing I've noticed during the pandemic especially is people sort of being like, oh, like the climate crisis, like we can deal with that after the pandemic, like it's not important now. Like I think that overall like climate activists of all ages sort of face this like societal idea that like this isn't an issue of right now, it's an issue for 10 years from now, and that's like so untrue. I mean, in the last few months we've seen like the scope of the fires that have like been happening like on the west coast of North America, and we've seen like more and more like tropical storms which are worse and worse, and these are just like the signs of the climate crisis like taking effect. We've seen more droughts, we've seen rising sea levels. Like this is not an issue that we can deal with 10 years from now, like this is an issue we need to deal with now. We're already seeing irreversible effects, and so I think like that's something we all like face, is this sort of like people don't understand the urgency. Like climate activists, we know it's urgent, but others don't sort of feel that same urgency, and that's like really difficult because we need to get people to understand that before we can even take action.
So I think we still face a very huge challenge with disinformation, and you know, the deep pockets of the corporations like the oil and gas industry that are fueling this disinformation. So platforms, you know, like social media, where anyone with an opinion can potentially have some influence, even without having any real science, evidence-based science to back up their views. And there's so much noise out there. And it is difficult for people who don't have an understanding of the climate science or the seriously and the immediacy of this problem. So yes, we are still facing big challenges with the disinformation campaigns.
To go on with the disinformation, I think that a lot of people are like, when they think of the climate crisis, they mostly think like, oh, well, I recycle, so I'm helping, and obviously recycling is slightly helping, but I think there's just this lie that everyone just thinks that the whole solution to this crisis is like recycling for a week or so or something like that, and I think myself, I've experienced a lot of people who just deny the crisis because they've read someone's tweet on Facebook quoting some conspiracy about the climate crisis and how it's all been faked. So it's social media is used as a platform for climate activists to spread their voice, but a lot of other people that want to spread misinformation that are not very informed about the climate crisis and about the science can spread stuff that might have an influence on some people.
Ruby, do you want to hop in? No, we're good. So I've noticed a little bit of a thread I want to pull on, and one of the conversations we've been having is, why is racial justice and a truly unified climate justice approach?
So I think that racial justice and climate justice in some way fight for similar things, because I think that we're fighting for a safe future, and I think that minorities and people in those communities are going to be severely affected by the climate crisis, and I think that we're both fighting for a safe future for everyone. I think that neither of us we don't want to grow up in a world where there's a climate crisis and racism and just all of that, and we just want a safe future where everyone can be treated equally, and where we can feel safe and pursue all of our dreams and not have to be disrupted.
I guess I'd like to, I'll jump in, and I want to start by saying, like, I think it's important for like at least me to acknowledge that like I'm white, and so like I can only speak on issues of like racial justice like from somebody who like looks in at these issues, and who has like a lot of privilege to be able to like speak on them without experiencing them. But one thing like we've seen from COVID is we've seen, you know, that COVID in Toronto has disproportionately affected like racialized communities and people of color. And I think like one thing like we know we will see as the climate crisis worsens is something similar, that generally these like public health crises affect people of color like more severely, and they in fact like affect impoverished communities more severely, and you know, people who like experience discrimination. And I think like as, you know, a white climate activist, it's like important for me to, you know, use my privilege to uplift those communities and make sure that like they don't you know, suffer the effects of the climate crisis. And I think like that's why it's like so related, is like, you know, fighting racial inequity and fighting the climate crisis are like one and the same, or many ways, and there's a lot of intersections between those.
So I couldn't possibly say it better than what Ruby did. And speaking also, you know, from a position of privilege and acknowledging that, and there is no solution to the environmental crisis without solutions to racial inequities, to these problems that really have been laid bare by the climate crisis, and of course the pandemic as well. And the pandemic is here and now, and you know, globally it's felt by all of us as an immediate threat. Climate change, perhaps by many, is still not seen as an immediate threat, as some of the other panelists alluded to earlier. But these challenges must be met together, and the racial injustices, we need to be making policies to address these issues with racialized minorities, with Indigenous people at the forefront of those policies, you know, determining them. What comes to mind for me is nothing about us without us. And I think that's a very, very important aspect. And thank you, Ruby, for your excellent comments as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about Ruby, I can't really speak to this, but what I can say is that when we talk about fighting the climate crisis and we talk about solving climate change in whatever way that is, we can't do that without also looking at issues like racial justice and economic justice and social justice, because when it all gets down to it, they have the same root causes. And if we really want to tackle the climate crisis, then we need to actually look at those issues as well. And I know that there are certain environmental movements that don't, and that's where a lot of them fall short. So I think it's really important that we centralize climate justice, like we said before, in the center of our organizing.
Yeah, of course. It's so important to have equitable activism, right? I'm going to ask just one more question before we hop back over to the slideshow. What would you suggest to young people and other activists that want to make their voices heard by their politicians and lawmakers?
The first thing I would suggest is that they join a group. I know across Ontario, across Canada, there are so many different youth activism groups. And when you join together with people who are like-minded, who have the same goals, who have the same interests, then you can really start to make bigger changes. And I think we've seen that with Fridays for Future Toronto, with FFF Sudbury, Climate Reality. When people come together, they start making real changes. And of course, you can do it alone, but like connecting with people, and it really, really helps in starting off your fight.
I can go, I guess. So something I've been saying ever since I've been getting this question has just grab a sign and get out there, because even if your parents won't let you miss school, you can start a social media account and speak out about it. Find some friends and people who are interested in the same thing as you, because once you have a group and people that you can talk about this issue with, you can start trying to lobby politicians, arrange meetings, and start trying to get political action in your city or your government.
Judy, do you want to go?
Sure. So it's my view that political leaders have to listen to the youth-led movement, or they're going to ignore it at their peril. The smart ones are listening, and you are the largest demographic, and you will change everything. But young people have to be mobilized to vote, and historically only 30 to 40% of young adults vote, and this has to change. And if you're too young to vote, you can still have your voices heard, like some of the comments that were made about how to do that. And you can also, even if you're too young to vote, you can encourage others to vote their values. And this is why I think, you know, the work that you're doing is so important.
I guess I would say that I'll tell people there are three things. The first one is, I've said this so many times to people, is call politicians. Call them. The more that I don't want to say annoy them, but the more you call them and email them, the more they have to listen. Like, even if you can't vote, you can call and email them, and they can't ignore it. If 100 people email them, they have to respond eventually. And so call and email your politicians, like, yes. The second thing I would say is to like educate people and educate yourself. One thing that like I've learned in the last year of doing this like activism is like you can never stop learning. So keep educating yourself. You know, everybody can do that. And then the third thing I'd say is to show up in whatever capacity you can. So like show up to events if you can, but like if you can't, you know, something you can always do is like post a picture of yourself on Friday on your own Instagram, and, you know, use hashtags like Climate Strike Online. And so like those are ways of like showing up in solidarity and like participating in actions like in whatever means you can, because every single thing that everybody does contributes to this, you know, like larger like movement. If you think of it as like a cup of water, and every drop is something that somebody did, eventually that cup is going to have to overflow and things are going to change. And so like whatever you can do is enough.
Those are great tips. Everybody here is just such a wealth of knowledge. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass it back to the climate team to speak a little bit more about their new programming.
Hi, can you hear me well? Okay, awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for that really, really interesting discussion. You guys brought so much so many new perspectives, and I really, really appreciate your taking the time to share your insights. I'm here to talk to you really quickly about the Campus Core program that we're currently launching. Basically, the Campus Core program is a program that exists in the United States, and we are currently working towards implanting it in a Canadian context through 3 campuses for this first pilot year. And the idea is to create student groups that are going to work to decarbonize their campuses, and also to bring their university administrations to divest from fossil fuels. This is a 100% student-led program. And yeah, so we're currently working to put it into place. And so if this is something that could interest you, I do encourage you to write to our Campus Core coordinator, Daphne Mongeau. Her email is appearing on the screen right now. So dmongeau@climatereality.ca. We have yet to select our 3 pilot campuses. So if you think that your campus could be a good potential first Campus Core, then do let us know. And once again, thank you for all the panelists for your insight and your time, and yeah, for this really, really stimulating discussion.
Your mic is muted.
Oh, my was muted. I know I'll definitely be in touch, Emily. I'm in my last year of studies, and I think my campus might be a good pilot and could need it. So folks, we have 3 amazing questions from the folks viewing us, and I will read them for you. So question 1, what about the Canadian government has promised to do to reduce carbon emissions, and what should we write to the government that they need to be accountable for?
I guess I can jump in and say, in terms of things to write to the government to be accountable for, I would look to like promises that the government has made and sort of things they have said. If you watched the throne speech yesterday, you know, the government said a lot of things that they were going to do about the climate. And while personally, like, I don't think what they said was enough, they still did say lots of things, you know, and they talked to, and I think it's important to like hold them accountable for those promises that they make, because, you know, in a democracy, it's our responsibility as constituents to make sure that we are being represented. Yeah.
I wanted to just touch on the throne speech, which Judy Feinstein gave yesterday, I think now. And just some of the promises they made were, for example, meeting the Paris Agreement targets. And they've made those promises before, and they came out, there were maybe chances of a really big, bold new environmental plan, and yet they stay with the same promises. And I think that's kind of the bare minimum that they need to do to save millions of lives and, you know, trillions of dollars of damage worldwide is meet the Paris Agreement. So if you're looking for your introduction into climate activism, then you can certainly start there. As Ruby said, look into the other promises they made. They said they would legislate the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So we should follow up on that. And all of those things, let's hold them accountable.
Yeah, I certainly second what Cooper said, your comments there. Promises are wonderful. We need details. We need accountability. And, you know, stringent targets that are legislated to protect our environment. So in order to hold government accountable, again, I'd stress how important it is for youth voices to be heard and to contact your politicians, your local elected officials, your provincial, federal elected officials, to be heard. And I think Ruby is quite correct. You cannot be ignored, and you will not be ignored. And I can sort of speak from the front lines of having worked for a politician for all these years. Yes, we do see your emails, absolutely, and the phone calls, and persistence, patience, persistence, politeness. That's my husband's 3 Ps that he's lived by and I've learned from. But you cannot be ignored. And you know, it may not be the most effective to sign petitions. We do receive a lot of mass emails, but your personal emails, your personal phone calls to your politicians, please keep that up, because it's incredibly important that you do.
I completely agree. And just to pull on that thread as well, what is your stance on lowering the voting age to 16, since climate change is an issue that affects us the most?
I'll jump in and say that I'm in favor of that. I think by the age 16, there's a lot of things that people are able to do, able to hold a driver's license, able to have employment, you know, that also young people are more informed than ever before. I was lucky I grew up in a family that was politically interested and active, and our discussions around the dinner table every night were about politics. I didn't necessarily agree with my parents' politics, but they wanted to make sure that I was expressing my views, and you know, I think that was very helpful for me as a young person.
Yeah, I agree. My parents asked me who to vote for. They know I'm the one that does all the research in the family, and then they call me around that time and like, okay, who is it? So also like young people have a lot of influence over our families too when it comes to political change.
I guess I just want to jump in really quickly and say, like, I mean, I personally think like it would make sense to lower it. You know, I look to people like Sophia and Cooper who both, you know, currently aren't of age to vote. I just turned 18, and so I'm just now of age to vote. And we've all been so politically active for so long. You know, we have personal relationships with politicians, and we, you know, are emailing and calling our politicians. It seems weird that we can be so politically involved, yet we don't actually have a say in who represents us, and we don't have a say in who represents like us and is going to make decisions about our futures, which to me seems like kind of strange. You know, why should an 18-year-old have more of a say than somebody who's 17? And so like I definitely think, you know, maybe lowering the voting age might make sense.
Mm-hmm. Just building off of that question, have you ever felt ignored because of your age? Yeah, you want to talk about it? Let's talk about it. Go for it, Sophia.
I think that when I'm on the streets or I'm on Zoom or I'm speaking online about something, I think a lot of people just, I always get like one climate denier that always comes at me saying that you're just a kid. You don't know what you're talking about. You should be in school. You shouldn't be learning about these things. Your childhood is being stolen from you. And I feel like those are all the things that I usually get for doing my activism, but I'm not telling you that I'm an expert. I for sure am not an expert on the climate crisis. I'm just spreading the word that there's a climate crisis out there and that we need to listen to the experts and the best united science. And so I definitely think that a lot of people always come at me for being too young for this movement because I'm only 13 and that I should be in school and learning about the climate crisis in school. But I think that by going to all these rallies, I think I've learned a lot more, and I think I've gained a lot of experience by doing this. And I think that a lot of people definitely need to educate themselves about the climate crisis, not from me, but from science.
I'll just add that I think youth and young people occupy a really unique space where people are inclined to kind of take a look at what we're doing as kids when they see all of these kids walking out of schools, but at the same time, they're not going to listen to our demands because we're kids and we're just skipping school. And it's a really weird line that people walk, and a lot of people walk, especially in our government. And I think that was one of our biggest barriers as youth organizers in Toronto, across Canada, is breaking through that kind of concept that we don't have a say because we're young people. We don't understand what real adults are talking about. And if anything, we've really proven that wrong over the past few years.
I guess for me, there was this really like distinct example in the last like 6 months of sort of a moment where I realized that like, because I was younger, like politicians were not taking me as seriously. You know, I was still 17 at the time, and like I got blocked like on Instagram by like more than one major politician in Canada. I don't know if we want to name names, but there's specifically a few, including, I guess I can name this name, like my own premier, Doug Ford, who has like blocked me and other like youth politicians on Instagram. I mean, not politicians, like youth activists on Instagram. And I think like that's like really like demonstrates like what it means, and like it's a really like good like indicator of the fact like we aren't taken as seriously. Rather than like listening to our voices, they just try to like silence them, and I think that's like really problematic and like kind of uncool.
Absolutely, that's so not cool. Judy, do you want to hop in?
I think that question was most appropriately directed at the other panelists. And in terms of feeling ignored, I think what I really try to do is to remain relevant to the young people that I work with, that I support. and that being heard by them as an ally, and what I want to contribute to stand with you and support you, to me, that's most relevant.
I think that's really beautiful too. Intergenerational learning is key if we're going to combat this crisis together. As we all know, tomorrow is the Global Day of Action. So what are things people can do to help out for tomorrow?
I'll answer this question because it's very exciting for me, because we've been working for months on the Global Day of Action tomorrow. People can help out by showing up. If you live in Toronto, we have a great action, completely COVID safe with social distancing, mask, all of those precautions with amazing speakers and performers. And we need every single person's support. Every single body matters in occupying space in political conversations. And if you can't come, there are so many amazing online events taking place. I know Sophia is organizing one in Sudbury. We have one as an alternative in Toronto. There's an international event taking place online. So, there's so many ways to help out. You can always support us financially, however you want, volunteering. I could talk about it all day, but there's definitely a lot of ways to help out.
I just want to jump in and say that the action in Toronto is from noon to 3 at Bay and Wellesley, because you mentioned it, but people don't know where to go. So if you want to come tomorrow in Toronto, that's where it is.
So as someone who doesn't live in Toronto, I live in so-called Sudbury, Ontario, but we're holding an online event. It's going to be on Zoom. You can find out more about it on our Facebook at Fridays for Future Sudbury, or on our Instagram. There's a form that you can fill out, and then we'll send you the Zoom link. I think already about 400 people have registered to come to our event. But we'd love to have more, because we're going to have politicians that have been supporting us for the past couple of years, and that are going to be speaking, and also a couple of youth speakers. So we hope that people will attend our events, and maybe if you can't attend the event, just post on social media and share the message.
All right, folks, it's been a wonderful hour spent with you all. And just to reiterate that there will be an event tomorrow for Triple F Toronto, having a socially distanced sit-in from noon to 3 at Bay Street and Wellesley. Their action is advocating for a just recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic that puts marginalized communities, workers, and environment first. The national actions can be found at #NotGoingBack. And for Sudbury as well, they're holding events online. And I imagine there'll be a lot of events happening online too for us on the West. And I just want to thank everybody for being here, and follow the Climate Reality Project Canada on Twitter, follow Fridays for Future Toronto on Twitter, follow all of us on Twitter, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. And if you're interested in the Campus Corps, get in touch. And thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful panel. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Been a real privilege.